Good day everyone, and welcome to the channel. It's Londononion here with another Back 4 Blood character build. And the character we'll be building in this video is Prophet Dan. Now generally I would say cleaners fall on a spectrum of roles/categories ranging from offensive, supportive, and defensive. And of course the degrees in between as we will uncover throughout the series. Just for consistency, I will define offensive roles and perks as abilities that are directly intended to increase damage or bolster offensive capabilities. Defensive roles and perks will be defined as abilities that directly increase survivability from punishment. Lastly, supportive roles and perks are defined as alternative skills that can be instrumentally used for offensive or defensive purposes without a defined intention for either polarization, but are ultimately a helpful perk for one's team. First, we will have a brief overview of our chosen cleaner, go through relevant cards that will either synergize or compensate with their attributes, and conclude with what I consider to be the main tactics to maximize the use of their abilities, as well as my closing statements. Now, for those who were present during our weapon reviews and deck builds, each weapon-centered deck build came with character designations. Our format with character builds will be similar, but with more priority to a given character and maximizing their role on a given team. So starting off with the character attributes of Dan. Dan has a unique two-pronged ability, enhancing his combat prowess for a short period of time upon a cleaner being incapacitated. Following revival, Dan will activate one of 7 perks/effects to aid his team in some fashion. Lastly, he has a team effect of an additional 3 units of team damage resistance and knockback immunity while reviving, though I am not particularly sure what those 3 units mean in said circumstance. Now in regards to our spectrum, it is the attributes that we will use to designate each cleaner. In Dan's case, I would classify his two-pronged unique ability as 2 points toward the supportive end, and I would classify his team effect of damage resistance and knockback immunity as 2 points in the defensive end. Now this ultimately places Dan directly in between the supportive and defensive classification. Typically, I would simplify quote-unquote divergent results to one designation or another. However, because of how strange Dan and his obscure abilities are, I will simply leave him in the restorative side of the spectrum. My logic here will hopefully become more clear as we progress through today's discussion. Now in regards to our card selection, we can compensate with the more offensive cards and we can synergize with more related and compounding cards depending on needs and playstyle. And naturally there is the option of creating a mixture or specialization. But if you ask me, a quintessential cleaner is not one that is good at everything, but one that fulfills the role in the best manner to aid the overall effectiveness of their team. So starting ourselves off with his deck build. As a restorative cleaner, for lack of a better term and designation, Prophet Dan is similar in meta to that of Doc and Mom, placing him as one of the more, if not the most, selfless cleaner, while at the same time not having a particular prowess toward healing. First, however, it is important to break down Dan's strange abilities. From what I have been able to observe when testing out this Prophet, upon a cleaner becoming incapacitated, Dan increases all of his basic skills, movement, reload speed, and damage, but for a very short period of time. Now I did not classify this part of his perks as offensive because not only does it last for an inconsequential period of time, but the increased damage is undefined and overshadowed by the other supportive constituents, that being movement and reload speed, based on how I define offensive, defensive, and supportive perks. As for Dan's effects following revival, he can activate one of 7 perks. Radiance, which is a series of live flashbangs, Carnage, a series of live frag grenades, Riches, several piles of copper, the Light, which increases damage or damage resistance by 5%, Vanish, a series of live smoke grenades, Vigor, full health being restored for the whole team, and Vitality, granting an extra life. Now unfortunately, none of these can be controlled for, but all seem to act as a general failsafe if a cleaner team should achieve a nasty blunder. As a small bonus, these effects don't require Dan himself to revive his team for said perks to take place. Now it seems like Prophet Dan was meant to be a cleaner team's safety net, but not necessarily through health kits or temporary health, but through second chances with an addition of small bonuses. However, this would prematurely lead us into his tactical implications, which we will discuss a bit later. Moving on to our card selections, our first card is Smelling Salts, which increases revive speed by 200%. Next, Pep Talk, reduces incoming damage from all ridden by 3 units while reviving teammates, and they recover an additional 10 health units. Rousing Speech allows teammates to recover an additional 10 health units upon revival, increases team revive speed by 50%, and grants 10% reduced in-cap trauma. Combat Medic increases use speed by 50% and allows teammates to recover an additional 20 health upon revival. Inspiring Sacrifice grants all teammates 20 health units over 10 seconds upon a teammate being incapacitated. Avenge the Fallen grants 30% additional damage, 20% reload speed, and unlimited ammo for 10 seconds upon a teammate becoming incapacitated. Next, Second Chance grants 1 extra life, an additional 15 health units, and as per our recent update, 25% bleed out resistance. Out with a Bang drops an active pipe bomb upon a cleaner dying or becoming incapacitated, but no longer grants an extra life as per our update. Life Insurance now grants 2 extra lives and a 10% reduction in incapacitation trauma. Needs of the Many reduces health of the card holder by 10% while granting an extra life for the team. Amped Up has a team effect of recovering 20 health upon a horde being triggered. Following, On Your Mark allows one's team to restore 7.5% ammo, 10% increased move speed while firing, 15% increased reload speed, and 25% swap speed for 30 seconds upon a horde being triggered. And this card still functions with timed hordes. Medical Professional allows defibs and health kits to heal 10 additional trauma units and will restore an extra life if the capacity is there. Saferoom Recovery allows one's team to recover 15 health units, 7 units of trauma, and 10% ammo at the start of each level. Lastly, Fanny Pack grants 1 additional support inventory slot and 15% trauma resistance. Overall, Dan's revive speed will increase by a grand total of 300% with the addition of use speed from Combat Medic. His healing effect upon revival will grant an additional 40 units of health. Incapacitation trauma will be reduced by 20%. And Dan will be granted 4 additional lives in conjunction to the starting amount, which is based on difficulty. Now the main idea behind this build is to create a healer, but one that is also distinguished from the other 2 main healers. That is not to say that this is a forced deck, but I would argue that it is a logical direction to craft his skills toward. Doc is a healer of permanence. Mom is a healer of temporary means. This leaves Dan as a provider of extra lives, while also providing small bonuses to ensure recovery and ultimately victory. Hence, his build, as backwards as the rationale may seem, is focused on minimizing the effects of failure, once said failure has taken place. I would argue that this goes in perfect line with his meta, as his skills demand a blunder of some sort before activation of any kind can take place. The card selections were meant to act as enhancements to his already stated perks. As touched on earlier, his perks upon revive cannot be controlled for, and consequently, one may get a barrage of grenades when there are no nearby threats, or will get a series of copper piles while the team is suffering from critical health, to name a couple examples of crappy odds, where an alternative perk would have been more favorable. Though with this logic, the opposite is also possible. But this influenced my choices in creating guaranteed perks that would be more favorable in the event his perks do not deliver as hoped for. Every time a horde is triggered, or every time a teammate goes down, Prophet Dan is there to cushion the blow with extra lives and helpful perks. As a brief tangent, with all the possible effects upon revival, overlap is almost guaranteed. And I wasn't sure if the damage/damage resistant perks would stack with each other. After some extensive testing with a basic rarity 870 Express shotgun, downing bots until getting the preferred effect, and employing the use of Knowledge is Power, the shotgun damage numbers consistently increased each time I had tested pellet damage against Ridden. So I think I can confidently state that repeated increased damage/damage resistance is not a wasted effect. Though the numbers may seem inconsequential for one cleaner, the main idea is to enhance the team by 5% each time, which becomes more significant when accumulated. Now, there were two more cards of interest that I would consider subbing into this deck as preferential alternatives to On Your Mark. That being Belligerent, as per our new update, and Overprotective. With these cards in play, Dan would have much greater offensive capability, which acts more as a compensating than a synergistic alteration. Speaking more on this, however, will lead us into his tactical implications and placement on a given team, which we will get into next. So as we had briefly touched on earlier, Dan seems to fit a similar meta to that of Mom and Doc, but also has a similar skill concept as Hang, in that a portion of his perks are based on luck and unfortunate events. Now Dan, based on his build and skills, is not an offensive cleaner, nor would I assert that he has a strong base of options as a first response to threats. At the same time though, Dan is in one of the stronger positions to sustain the most amount of punishment with his extra lives. Additionally, provided he is holding 2 health kits, those can essentially act as 2 extra lives, if the circumstances demand it. Alternatively, those health kits can also be reserved for his team, as they are less likely to have as many lives as himself. Now, it might sound as if I'd recommend Dan for an alpha role. Though it would not be my first choice, it is in this Onion's opinion an option, since he can bounce back from anything, more times than most. But I wouldn't designate a role based on being a punching bag. Similar to Mom and Doc, I would designate Dan for the minor role. The minor, as I conceptualize the role, is the most protected role on a cleaner team, and acts as the team's supportive hub. As the most protected role, they are also intended to be the most selfless role. This is also why I built Dan to have a second support slot. Not necessarily for himself, but ideally for his more offensively oriented cleaners. Most likely the Alpha or Major. Speaking of offense, the minor is the least offensively oriented role, only firing when absolutely necessary, i.e. self-defense or defending another cleaner, or when extra firepower is required in either direction, as demanded by the surrounding team. This is ultimately meant to reduce the odds of friendly fire, especially on higher difficulties, and to aid with conserving ammo. Now, Dan was not constructed with any particular loadout. As a minor, I would say this is rather appropriate. As a non-offensive cleaner, their ammo priority comes last in this Onion's opinion. It is when cleaners fall that Dan's abilities begin to shine as a quick failsafe to prevent complete failure. Now, I've given a fair amount of playtime to Dan, and although his meta doesn't necessarily agree with my more favored playstyles, I've been able to have rather consistent success, despite constantly venturing through each level with over 50% trauma damage and limited copper. But through sheer attrition of being repeatedly incapped and revived, using health kits and having some lucky revive effects save myself and my team of bots, I was able to emerge victorious each time. But that is just my experience with this build. He is not necessarily meant to finish battles quickly, but despite all that the Ridden will throw at him and his team, there is a very good chance they will continue to rise. Metaphorically, I would say Prophet Dan can be likened to Beatrice Pryor from the movie Divergent, Doctor Strange from the Marvel Universe, especially in the scene against Dormammu, or dare I say, our Mother Earth. If we tried to destroy this planet, it would definitely outlast us 1,000,000 years to one. But maybe that one is not fair, so as an alternative, I would say Two-Face from the DC Universe. Each character different from one another, but explaining aspects of Prophet Dan in their own way. Now, everything in this discussion can be taken with a grain of salt, as deck build combinations are too complex for me to fairly evaluate them. However, this is the build I prefer to use when playing on higher difficulties with Prophet Dan. Now, it is paramount to state that team maturity is ultimately what makes any deck work. And for those who were present during our last cleaner discussion, I'm using maturity as an umbrella term to describe each individual's general understanding of roles, navigation, character and weapon attributes, ridden/mutation deterrent tactics, resource management, and ultimately collaboration, as this is a team-based game. I would also argue that the greater one's team maturity is, the greater efficacy, specializations, like the one we just went through, will have, as each person will have a greater understanding of what it means to operate as a unit without being overbearing or breaking roles. Carrying on, less maturity will likely demand more of a compensating build, kinda like the one we just went through, so as to provide support where there are more deficiencies. However, there is far more to compensate with than there is to specialize with, and would create an unnecessarily long discussion. Before we close off, one of you posed a valid question a while ago about revisiting Walker and his build. Given our recent updates, this is a must, as there is a fair amount of overlap between these cleaners and their card selections. But this brings us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you guys for joining me on this one, and in our next video, the cleaner-up discussion will naturally be Walker, and we will determine an updated build to balance out this cleaner team. It's been Londononion, and I will see you guys next time.